Monday morning, everyone. I see happy faces around the circle, around the table. Malheureusement,
Unfortunately, okay, Mr. Deschênes.
Without him. Okay.
C'est beaucoup de sollicitude. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you for your solicitude. Yes, I'm with you, and I will be in person with you tomorrow. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning to everyone who's here today. Welcome to this meeting. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 33 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. In order for everything to go smoothly, I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and the members.
You guys have all memorized it by now. I'm going to do a test next time. But for this time, I will just remind everyone, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those that are on Zoom, kindly click on the microphone icon to activate your microphone, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. As well, you could also select the appropriate channel for interpretation, whether you would like it to be in English or in French. For those in the room, and we do have two of our guests in the room today, you could use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I want to remind all the witnesses that the committee members may ask questions in either French or English. If you need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel. You will need in advance in order to take full advantage of the time. Yes. Monsieur Joseph, pardon? Il n'y a pas de traduction. OK, on attend.
There's no interpretation. We're waiting. What's happening with the interpretation?
While we're waiting, I'll just take a minute to warmly welcome Mr. Wade Chang, who's a new member of our committee. It's a pleasure to have you here. I know that we had another member substitute while you were finishing off our report, so welcome.
So was it only him or others had issues?
Is there anyone else that's had issues, that is having issues with interpretation? Monsieur Deschênes, ça va pour vous?
Mr. Deschênes, is it okay for the interpretation? I didn't listen to the interpretation so far, so I can't say anything about it.
On attend.
We're waiting.
I will try again, Monsieur Joseph. Oui, OK, c'est bon. OK, excellent.
So it's working. Excellent. I will start again.
Committee members may ask questions in either French or English. If you need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece. Select the listening channel you need in advance in order to take full advantage of the time allocated for questions and answers. Of course, please ensure all your comments are addressed to the chair. And members, you guys are all superstars. I'm just going to remind you, though, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. Please, please, please do not speak over each other. It's hard for our translators to translate, and it makes their jobs difficult. And, of course, I will do my best for both the speakers as well as members to let you know when you have a minute left. And thank you in advance to all of you for your cooperation. Just something to remind everyone, we do have a vote at 1 o'clock. So I will, once the bells ring, I will ask for, we'll at that point decide whether or not we want an extra 15 minutes before we go upstairs. But I want to remind everyone we do have a vote. We'll have a decision to make as we get closer to that vote. Okay, with that, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on April 27, 2026, the committee is commencing its study of provincial distribution of asylum seekers in Canada. Before I introduce the witness, we have to adopt a budget for the study. And another one at the same time. So for the first budget, it's $28,250 for the study on asylum seekers, which begins today. Can I have someone move for us to? Yes, I have Mr. Zuberi, who is moving for us to approve does everybody approve the? Yes, we have. Monsieur Deschênes, est-ce que vous avez des problèmes avec le
Mr.
bouge?
Deschênes, do you have any problem with the budget? No, it's fine.
For the second budget, it's $55,000 for the study on attracting and empowering global talent. Who will move it? Mr. Fragiscatos, any problems? No, I don't see any. Monsieur Deschênes, est-ce que ça va pour
Mr.
vous?
Deschênes, do you agree with this? Thank you.
To get to the main reason of this meeting today, I would like to welcome our witnesses for our first hour. As an individual, backed by popular demand, we have Mr. Barutsky, who is a professor from York University. We also have Anita Stelinga, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Costi Immigration Services. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for coming in person. It's always nice to see people in person. But we are also very pleased online to also warmly welcome Steve Jacques, the Commissioner of Human Services for the region of Peel by video conference. So up to 5 minutes will be given to each of you for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. I am going to start off with Mr. Barutsky. There you go. Barutsky for 5 minutes, and we'll follow with Ms. Stelinga, and then we'll round up with Mr. Jacques. Mr. Barutsky, thank you. You've got 5 minutes, and it starts now.
Madame la Présidente, merci de m'avoir invité.
Madam Chair, thank you for having invited me. So I spend a lot of time analyzing immigration policies and laws, so it's a great honor for me to be here. And I'm impressed by the quality of the work carried out by the members of the three parties who are present. The very fact that you're examining the issue of the interprovincial distribution of asylum seekers is a positive sign. Sharing responsibilities has always been a complicated issue. I began working on this subject 33 years ago. I was a part of a team of researchers funded by major American foundations. The lesson I learned, which might be relevant for you, is the following. Proposals from the academic sector focus on the demands of human rights activists, and they are not concerned with political constraints or the limitations of government action. I believe you're in a better position to determine what is realistic or even necessary, as you know the voters in your constituencies.
I was asked by UNHCR to be a member of the Independent Commission on the Kosovo Crisis, 1999. The lesson I learned was that governments were ready to share the responsibilities, but human rights advocates would not accept involuntary transfers. They insisted on consent, and that led to even bigger problems. Albanians from Kosovo started choosing the country they preferred in terms of socioeconomic conditions, despite the ongoing crisis. They could have gone to neighboring Albania, where NATO-built camps were waiting empty, but they actually wanted to go to rich countries like Germany. The 5,000 that came here did that as a second or third choice. There were flights organized by the Canadian government where people simply did not show up because they had better options. The CBC Radio-Canada correspondent on the ground didn't understand that a bigger regional crisis was averted thanks in part to neighboring Greece that accepted involuntary transfers when the chaotic frontline reception at the Kosovo border was destabilizing the whole region. Sur cette notion de consentement,
on this notion of consent, 2 months ago, the committee asked a simple question of the Director General of Asylum Policy at the department. He replied that the Canadian Charter guarantees that asylum seekers, and I'm quoting, have the right to live wherever they want. It's clear that he's mistaken. Read Section 6 of the Charter, which is unambiguous. The right to move or to reside in any province is guaranteed only to citizens and permanent residents. As temporary residents, asylum seekers do not have this right. It's striking that this sort of false idea is circulating within the department. If you believe consent is required, in my view, there's no point In proceeding with the study, asylum seekers will simply head for the major urban centers. The next question to be addressed is whether relocation should be carried out using a generalized system which would be applicable to all asylum seekers, as is the case in Germany. The alternative would be to have a system that applies only in emergency situations, such as the sea crossings that have affected Greece or Italy, or like the Roxham route, which has disproportionately affected Quebec.
Distribution formula. For example, Italy has adopted a quota for municipalities with more than 1,000 residents. Germany calculates according to tax revenues and population size for each of its federal states. I was in Germany 10 days ago. When a migrant claims asylum, a software algorithm automatically assigns a reception center in a specific land. Berlin, for example, is supposed to get 5% of all asylum seekers this year. So, to summarize, Canada could address the issue of provincial distribution of asylum seekers in a more equitable way. Firstly, responsibility sharing becomes mandatory. Secondly, the distribution is part of the standard response. In other words, it applies to all asylum seekers. And thirdly, we establish a distribution formula that takes into account the socioeconomic situation of the partners in the Federation. Si vous voulez des clarifications, ça me ferait plaisir
If you need any clarifications, I would be happy to answer during the question period. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Siski, thank you. Next, we have Ms. Stellinga for 5 minutes. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Anita Stellinga. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Costi Immigrant Services. For almost 75 years, Costi has provided employment, education, settlement, housing, language, mental health, and social supports to newcomers and their families across the Greater Toronto Area. We welcome this study because, in our view, the provincial distribution of asylum seekers is less a question of fairness between jurisdictions than whether the system produces the right outcomes. The test of any new approach is practical. Does it help people stabilize faster, move into housing sooner, enter the labor market more quickly, and reduce avoidable pressure on shelters, health systems, and municipalities? Yes, Ontario and Quebec continue to receive the largest shares of asylum claims in Canada. The issue is not simply where people first arrive. It is whether Canada has the reception, housing, and settlement infrastructure to support people after they make a claim. At Costi, we see every day that housing instability is not a side issue in the asylum system. Housing is the hub of the settlement wheel. Around it are the elements that allow a person or family to move from survival to stability: healthcare, education, language training, employment services, legal navigation, social connection, and community. Housing without these supports is only a roof. That distinction matters because Canada should not be aiming only to locate and house asylum seekers. We should be aiming to help people build a home. A home is more than a physical address. It includes community, dignity, agency, and belonging. The benefits of immigration, social cohesion, labor market participation, and long-term contribution depend on that connection to community. That is why we urge caution about models that distribute asylum seekers primarily by population share, fixed quotas, or administrative allocation. A formula may look fair on paper, but it does not tell us whether housing exists, whether employment pathways are realistic, or whether a community is ready to welcome people well. Moving people without that foundation simply moves pressure around the country. Access to services, supports, and pathways can vary depending on where someone first arrives, where they are referred, and which provincial or municipal systems they encounter. Communities differ in their labor markets, housing conditions, service networks, and cultural connections. Newcomers should be able to consider those differences when deciding where to build their lives. Equity should not mean assigning people to places. Equity requires informed choices and reliable access to the supports that allow them to build a home, contribute, and belong. Many newcomers understandably navigate towards large urban centers like Toronto and Montreal because they assume large cities offer more jobs, more services, and a better chance of success. Sometimes they do, but large cities can also have high housing costs, stretched services, and difficult labor markets. This study should not only ask where people land, it should ask where people are able to stay, work, build community, and set down roots. If newcomers can assess housing, employment, education, health navigation, language, and community supports before choosing where to build their lives, they are more likely to make choices that last and have better outcomes. If they arrive only to discover that supports are unavailable, housing is out of reach, or jobs are harder to access than expected, then the system has not served them, municipalities, or the communities asked to welcome them. Rather than creating a system that restricts movement, Canada should create one that coordinates funding, service navigation, and outcomes across jurisdictions. In practical terms, that means a multi-year, intergovernmental, national asylum and housing strategy that codifies the respective roles and funding responsibilities of federal, provincial, and municipal governments. We need a single framework characterized by collaboration and coordination across all levels of government for reception, referral, support by shared data infrastructure. The goal would not be to track people in order to control their movement. The goal would be to ensure continuity of support, prevent duplication, reduce service gaps, avoid overwhelming local systems, and give newcomers reliable information about their options that encourages geographic distribution. A national system could help identify where housing pathways, services, and community networks already exist, and where additional capacity could be developed to make more communities realistic choices for settlement. It could also help governments and service providers measure outcomes across jurisdictions, time to housing, time to work authorization, time to employment, school enrollment, health navigation, and connection to community. In closing, COSTI recommends that the committee support a national asylum and housing model built on 4 principles: mobility, not restriction; informed choice, not administrative assignment; coordinated funding, not fragmented responses; and measurable outcomes, not crisis management.
Thank you, Ms.
COSTI
Stilling.
stands ready to stand.
I'm sorry, you're well
you.
over time. You're well over time. Thank you. Thank you for that. And maybe in the questions, we might be able to have you maybe make your final points. Mr. Jacques, c'est à vous. It's now your turn. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Steve Jakes. I'm the Commissioner of Human Services in the region of Peel in Ontario, which encompasses 3 municipalities: the city of Brampton, town of Caledon, and the city of Mississauga. I'm here today to share Peel's response to the needs of homeless asylum claimants. Peel reflects Canada's long-standing commitment to immigration. More than half of our residents were born outside of Canada, and we are home to Pearson International Airport, the country's primary gateway. As a result, Peel and the Greater Toronto Area receive a significant share of asylum claimants, many of whom arrive in need of immediate shelter supports and help navigating complex systems. Beginning in 2023, we saw an unprecedented surge in asylum claimants in need of homelessness support. By the fall, our shelter system was operating at nearly 400% capacity and nearing collapse. At the peak, nearly 3/4 of shelter residents were asylum claimants. Since then, Peel has supported 8,500 homeless asylum claimants. This surge occurred within an already strained system. Peel has more than 37,000 households on the affordable housing waitlist. Shelters were already full prior to this increase. Since 2001, homelessness has risen 223%, with asylum claimants accounting for a significant portion of that growth. At the same time, affordability has worsened. It now takes the equivalent of 3 full-time minimum wage jobs to afford average rent in Peel, and many households remain priced out of homeownership. While supports like the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit are essential, our allocation is exhausted each year due to high demand. Additional funding of $2.1 million in 2023 and 24 helped approximately 180 asylum claimant households, but ongoing supports have not kept pace with need, and no additional allocations for asylum claimants has been issued. Despite these pressures, Peel has acted. As a municipality primarily funded through property tax and unable to run deficits, we are not designed to sustain a national asylum system. But between 2023 and by the end of 2026, Peel will have committed more than $13 million from local tax reserves to maintain services. Working with the federal government and community organizers, we established the Peel Reception Center, one of the largest dedicated asylum claimant shelters in Canada. It provides wraparound supports that include settlement services, housing assistance, health services, legal aid, language training, income, and employment support, all focused on helping individuals transition to stable housing. This working model with federal support through the Interim Housing Assistance Program, more than 60% of clients have moved into housing and more than half have remained in the region of Peel. However, this work remains more difficult as mental health needs among asylum claimants are increasing, rental costs continue to rise, affordable housing, especially shared housing, is extremely limited. At the same time, work permit delays limit employment opportunities for newcomers. Compounding these pressures make it hard for municipalities to meet both operational demands and contractual obligations. The evidence is clear. The current model disproportionate operational and financial pressures on municipalities. That pressure is no longer sustainable. Therefore, we offer 4 recommendations for the committee consideration. 1, supporting asylum claimants must be recognized as a coordinated national function with predictable, stable funding. Municipalities cannot continue to fund federal immigration responsibilities through local tax reserves. 2nd, housing benefits must be integrated into the national housing strategy through a permanent allocation for asylum claimants. This is a structural need, not a temporary pressure. 3rd, Canada needs a more balanced national hub and spoke system that distributes arrivals across the country based on labor markets, housing availability, community readiness, and the funding should follow the claimant regardless of where they settle.
1 minute.
And 4th, thank you. And the 4th, until such a system exists, the federal government must invest in gateway communities such as Peel at levels that respect the scale and reality of the demand that they are absorbing. There is a growing gap between responsibility and resources. Canada is not overwhelmed by those seeking refuge. We are underinvested in municipalities that support them every day. If we want an asylum system that is fair, effective, and built to last, then closing the gap isn't optional, it's essential. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jacques, and thanks to all to everyone for opening remarks. Now we are going to turn to rounds of questions, and our first round is rounds of 6 minutes. Our first questioner is Mr. Menegakis. Mr. Menegakis, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing before us today. I want to start with you, Mr. Baruchiski. You recently wrote that foreigners who are unlawfully present in the country should always be treated in a humane manner, but they have to accept the consequences of their illegal actions. Can you give some examples of immigration pathways that are being commonly abused today?
Yes, so I think an effective asylum, an effective and a sustainable asylum policy always has to try and balance the humane treatment of asylum seekers and the legitimate interests of the state. What we've seen, I mean, just even claiming asylum could arguably be seen as, even the minister has admitted, the previous minister has admitted that some people who are here on different temporary statuses claim asylum just to stay longer. If someone has a student visa, has been there for a number of years, it does raise potential problems if asylum is the...
Yes, point of order.
The video doesn't seem to be working.
The video does not work.
Yeah, the video, the camera's pointing at you the whole time.
Well, that's because I should be the center of attention always. But hold on, let's check the video.
Make sure we stop.
I'm joking. C'est une blague, Monsieur Deschênes. C'est une blague.
It was a joke, Mr. Deschênes. Yes, yes.
At me. Please give it to our witness. Remy, are we good?
Yeah, let's try it again.
Okay, we're going to try to... Oh, look, now we have the room. So I think we're good, Mr. Ho. Okay, Mr. Menegakis, we did stop your time, and now we are going to restart.
Yes.
Professor Baruchiski, please.
So I was talking about change of statuses, and sometimes there could be problems with that. Part of that balance we're trying to attain is also the factors that my colleague mentioned about housing, work, and integrating community has to be balanced with the other side. And the government does have an interest in controlling, particularly people, asylum seekers who are here to claim asylum. We don't know if they will be staying in the long term. So it is a bit of a tricky question.
So you mentioned that they should also accept the consequences of the illegal action. So what do you believe the consequences of their illegal action should be?
Well, I just said about control. So if someone is not respecting immigration laws, there should be consequences. And we do have procedures, so they have to be enforced.
We've recently seen judges give preferential treatment to folks to take into consideration to protect their immigration status. Let's put it that way. Do you agree that non-citizen immigrants should be treated differently than a Canadian citizen for committing the same crime?
I understand the good intentions behind that, but I think part of the leitmotif behind what I'm saying is that we have to be careful not to overcompensate and to be overly generous in how we interpret the rights. That was one of the points I was making in my initial statements. I think we do that a lot, and that is actually, in my view, one of the reasons we found ourselves in the current predicament. A surge happened around the Toronto International Airport a couple of years ago, not by chance. There was policies that led to a lot of claims at the airport.
Yeah. So most Canadians believe that if you commit a crime, you should get the same sentence no matter who commits it. Doesn't matter what your status is or not. But anyhow, by letting asylum claims drag on for years, hasn't the government's strategic incompetence turned a backlogged asylum system into a ticket to residency?
Indirectly, that's the effect. We have procedures that are so complicated and are used in a way that actually is just unmanageable. But we also have high numbers of claims. Even now, we still have compared to what we had 10 years ago.
No question about that. So I want to talk a little bit about the IRB backlogs, because you've commented on that. You suggested completely abolishing the tribunal, which is quite a strong stance to take. I'm sure you would agree. What did the Liberals do to make you believe this will be the best path forward?
I didn't actually say we should abolish. I say we should consider.
Okay.
And I don't think particularly
So
the
what
government...
led you to believe that?
So I don't think it's actually necessarily what the governing party has done over the last few years. I think it's actually the IRB, which is you gave it, the Parliament gave it an independent mandate. And I think it's been, as I observed the IRB since it was created in 1989, it's actually taking a lot of these powers, and in its procedures, it's going back to the theme we were just talking about a few moments ago. It's interpreting all the norms in, I would say, the most open way possible. That's good, and I understand the intentions behind that, but it does lead to complications, and you're highlighting one of them is that we have procedures that drag on forever, and that obviously changes the status of someone. You can't be doing an asylum procedure for 3, 4, 5, 6 years without acknowledging that they do need to be integrated into the local community. So we've created a system that is not sustainable, is what I would say, and we should consider, Parliament should consider the powers it gave to this unit, to this agency, including changing it, because the models we have around the world are quite different.
Mr. Jacques, I'd like to move over to you, if I may, sir. You mentioned that Peel is doing more than their fair share of accommodating asylum seekers, asylum claimants in our country. Can you elaborate a little bit on what the tremendous backlogs we see continue to grow in the asylum system, what effect that has had on Peel Region specifically?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question.
1 minute.
Yep. As far as the backlog goes, we just process individuals and work with individuals that come through. So we, on average through our reception center, we can house and work with 592 individuals. And they're usually there for about 90 days. That's the length of stay that IRCC has suggested it be in order to work them through with Ms. Talinga and her team to get them the health care that they need coming into the country, their employment status, as well as any other training. And we run, job fairs and the rest. So it takes around 90 days for those individuals to get to a point where they can start to make decisions about where they go on average. That length of stay has increased based on the complexities of the market. So that's gone well over to 100 and 110 days per individual that comes in.
Where do you house them, sir?
I'm sorry, Mr. Menegakis, that is time. but you could continue in the next round. Now we have 6 minutes for Ms. Zodi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask my first set of questions to Ms. Delinga. As you know, well, obviously you know, but Costi has been the service delivery partner at Peel Reception Center since it opened, and the work that you do speaks volumes and truly does make a difference in our communities. Can you describe what federal funded support looks like on the ground for newcomers in Brampton and Peel region as a whole, and how federal investment translates into real outcomes for families that are struggling in times of need?
Thank you for the question. As I was saying earlier in my comments, I think it's essential that people, newcomers, are supported in order for them to settle successfully and to achieve those outcomes that are their dreams, their aspirations. People come here because they want to start a new life, a new beginning for them, their family, and so on. And so federal funding in regards to the asylum claimants flows through the municipality, through the region of Peel, to us as a service provider at the asylum site, shelter site in Peel region in Mississauga. And we're able to provide a variety of supports, everything from shelter to assistance finding housing, language, employment supports, mental health supports, trauma supports, assistance with navigating the community, all of those things that are critical for them and their families to begin their days here. And we know that those outcomes are incredibly important. Those supports are really important because that drives the success in the community. I think the other part is that the funding allows the community, the region, to be accessible in terms of a system, having an infrastructure in place that is welcoming, that supports individuals. And that is essential because without that partnership, that coordination between federal and regional municipal, we would not be able to provide the supports and services that enable people to begin their lives successfully here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the answer. Canada welcomes thousands and thousands of newcomers every year, and they all end up settling in different parts of the country for all different kinds of reasons. Can you explain how that process works and what factors influence where asylum seekers and refugees tend to settle?
Well, what we're seeing is, on the premise of the study, in terms of people are going largely to larger urban centers, Toronto, Montreal, because they are ports of entry, but they're also because there's an assumption that these cities, urban centers, have greater access to jobs, to housing, to supports, to cultural communities that individuals may be associated with. And so that's an important part of where people will choose to live. Our point is that if we want to have distribution across the country into different parts, we have to ensure that that system is coordinated, that it is in partnership with all levels of government to ensure that supports on the ground are available. It would be entirely unfair if we were to take people and put them in places where there are no supports, where communities are not welcoming, where there isn't the infrastructure, and where there, more importantly, there isn't that coordination that is really necessary to ensure that people are accessing services, we're reducing service gaps, we're reducing duplication, and really setting people up for success.
Mm-hmm. You've also highlighted the need to counter harmful narratives about immigration. In your experience at Costi serving Brampton and Peel region's newcomer communities, what are some of the concrete stories of contribution and success that you would want the committee or Canadians to hear more of?
We see without a doubt that people come here, they are looking to start their lives. They are extremely inspired and motivated to be successful for themselves and for their families. They do not want to be in a shelter. They do not want to be living. This shelter in Mississauga is a dorm-style shelter for 90 days. It is not the best of places for you to be in. They want to move out. They want to go into community. They want to start their own lives. And we have many, many such stories of people where they've come in, they've accessed those supports, they've been able to stand on their own feet, they've been able to go to language classes, get jobs. We had a beautiful story recently where a young woman who had arrived was supported by our shelter, was given language classes, access supports, went out, became a teacher, came back to the community and was teaching at the school next door to the shelter site. She came back to the shelter and told her story, and it was a beautiful full circle of how she was now contributing and giving back to the community where she was essentially supported, where the doors opened up for her in the first place. And we have tons of stories and outcomes like that.
No, that's amazing, and I think it goes to show what we can actually do if we help and empower one another. We had heard in opening remarks that there was an influx and a surge in asylum seekers and refugees, predominantly within the Peel area. And after a period of rapid growth, our new government is working to restore stability and balance to the immigration system. Our government's first immigration levels plan saw a return to more sustainable levels, and we are also seeing the temporary resident population decline. As a settlement service provider for newcomers in the GTA, can you tell this committee how sustainability and predictability in programs is important for the critical work that you do?
We're focused on outcomes for our country, for our region, our neighborhoods, and in order to have those successful outcomes, the settlement sector, which is a sector that I'm a part of, my agency is a part of, along with many partners, municipal governments contributing to those supports and services, we know that it is just as important as physical infrastructure. Just as we think about roads and bridges and schools and hospitals, settlement supports and supports for newcomers are essential because we are driving people-focused outcomes. We are driving those outcomes with support of the federal, provincial, and regional governments to ensure that people have access to services, without which it would be very, very difficult for people to do that. So the predictability for the sector, to be able to know that we can count on the funding to deliver that, to know that we have qualified professional staff that are trained
Thank you,
and
Ms.
accountable,
Dalinga.
and that we have accountability reports in place to drive that is an
Thank you, Ms.
important part.
Dalinga. Sorry, we've run out of time, and thank you, Ms. Sodi. Next, maintenant, c'est à vous, Monsieur Deschamps. Vous avez...
Now you have the floor, Mr. Deschamps, for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to make sure that the camera will be following the speakers. Thank you to all my committees on the Immigration Committee to have accepted exploring this following a motion of the BQ so that we can look at a fair distribution in the provinces. So we are welcoming 37% of asylum seekers of the whole Canada, even though population is a smaller proportion. We're a very welcoming community, but we have to accommodate these asylum seekers, and it has economic repercussions. And the issue of French, well, more than a third of the asylum seekers do not master French upon arrival. So we want to explore solutions to make sure that there is a fair distribution. And we see that the EU has is putting a convention to have a better distribution of asylum seekers. That Denmark is applying some solutions, Germany as well. My first questions are for Mr. Baruchewski. Thank you for being here. First question, what motivated Germany, among other countries, because you gave that example, to propose a process of moving, of relocation of asylum seekers? The German experience was a problem for many years. Many asylum seekers from various other European countries would try to go to Germany, so proportionally had a greater proportion of asylum seekers, and in some ways that is a bit similar to the Quebec situation. But Germany is not the first point of entry, the first country into which the asylum seekers were entering. It's a secondary movement. They go through other countries first. So Germany wanted responsibilities to be shared with other European countries because the immigrants needed to cross through the other countries, but then they would end up in Germany. And that's why Germany wanted this system to be modified. So that lasted many years. And now that they have too many asylum seekers, according to the government and the population, they're trying to encourage their partners, their European partners, to better distribute these asylum seekers. And Mr. Baruchewski, we'll come back to the German formula. I'd like you to explain that for the committee members. But Earlier, you talked about a question I asked to an official of the Immigration Department. Could we relocate these people? And I was answered that according to Section 6 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that would impinge on their rights. But if I look at Section 6, I have the same interpretation as you. This is only applicable to permanent residents and citizens. So that was an erroneous interpretation to your mind? Yes, as I wrote many times, to my mind, it's clearly erroneous. And I think it's really surprising that we can have that impression circulating at the Department of Immigration. I understand why we want to encourage immigrants, but I think we want to go too far there. What I was said earlier, we want to find a reasonable equilibrium. And to say that there's a right that doesn't exist in the Charter, I think that's one of our at the root of our problems over the past few years. We exaggerate the rights, and that leads to problems, especially since Section 6 is clear. It's all Canadian citizens and all those who have the status of permanent residents in Canada have the right to relocate and to choose which province they want to live. So in terms of the legality of a process to redistribute fairly, you don't see a problem in terms of Canadian law. In terms of the relocation of the asylum seekers, there may be other issues of equality. But in terms of being able to travel and go to another province, I think that Section 6 is very clear. It could not be clearer. So we have a minute and a half left. Tell us about the German formula. How does that work? You talked about the weighting, the capacity of welcome of the lender and the states, and what are the results we've seen. As I said, I think that's an interesting model that we can study further. The idea is that when the asylum seeker arrives, there's a program, an app that will assign, or an algorithm that will assign that person where and which of the lender it should go. So in terms of encouraging the asylum seekers to go to certain regions, and the idea is to distribute it fairly so that not all asylum seekers are in urban regions, so that they're not just in Berlin. Now they will go to Thüringen or other places. And the idea, what the Germans are suggesting, is that the population is more comfortable with a kind of controlled distribution of these asylum seekers, and it allows the government to keep the doors open. So in 10 seconds, is this working? It's hard to be categorical, but I think up to a certain point, it's working well enough in that context so that it could be an interesting idea for us. If we want to create a model, we have to look at that German example. Thank you, Mr. Deschênes. Thank you, Professor Baruchitsky.
Questions. We now move into the second round of questions, which is 5 minutes each. First, we have Mr. Ho. Mr. Ho, your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are for Mr. Jakes at the region of Peel. So, Mr. Jakes, what sort of services does the region of Peel provide to asylum claimants?
Thank you, through the chair. Well, we hire organizations such as COSTI to provide those services, but we provide healthcare services. So from a public health perspective, there's a doctor on site, there are nurses on site, public health officials on site to make sure all the vaccinations are up to speed. We provide employment counseling as well as employment opportunities. So we bring in companies such as Tim Hortons, for example, to run job fairs for individuals. We work with them through housing navigation to understand what housing opportunities are available for them, career opportunities for them.
Does that include providing 3 meals a day for asylum claimants?
Yes. So our reception center.
Does that include providing services like shelters, like hotels and other housing accommodations temporarily for asylum
families?
Claimants? Yeah.
Yes, for families.
For families.
So for individuals.
And who pays for these hotels?
So it's cost shared between the federal government and the municipality.
And how much does what money does Peel receive from the federal government through these interim housing assistance program?
So for eligible costs for 25-26, we received 95% of eligible costs for transitional housing in the reception center from the federal government. Peel responsible for 5%.
How much is that in dollar value?
So in dollar value, in 2025, federal contribution was $29.8 million, and then the regional contribution was $2.3 million.
Wow. And so these services are being provided before a confirmation of eligibility from the federal government has been provided. Is that correct?
I believe so.
So that means a fraudulent asylum claimant could potentially receive these services. Is that correct?
Potentially.
Yeah, potentially. So according to the government website, it says, quote, historically, asylum claimants made up just 4 to 5% of the shelter population. By late 2023, they accounted for approximately 71%, nearly 3 out of every 4 individuals in the system. This surge pushed Peel's shelter capacity to over 400%, requiring Peel Region to secure overflow hotel spaces to meet the growing demand, end quote. So is it correct that Peel has had to use overflow hotel spaces because the shelter system was overwhelmed by the sharp increase in asylum claimants?
In 2023, yes, we rectified that. We separated the domestic homeless population from the asylum claimant home population. We converted a commercial building to a congregate living for individuals. So it can accommodate up to 590 some individuals in that center. So those two are separated, and we do use
in that
hotel
facility,
for families.
You talked about how much federal money did you receive to build that facility?
We received $22 million, of which we only spent 20.
Okay. So does local homelessness still exist in the region of Peel?
Absolutely.
So essentially the government is housing asylum claimants, but there's still local homelessness for Canadians in Peel. So does that mean that the asylum seekers that are pushing out local Canadians who are facing homelessness, is that a fair characterization?
No, not in our system, because we separated the two populations. We have a dedicated center. The Peel Reception Center is for asylum claimants to come, and we have hotels dedicated for family asylum claimants, and we have a separate shelter system for homeless.
So do you normally do criminal background checks prior to serving asylum claimants and giving them hotel accommodations? I'm talking about local criminal background checks, or if they've committed a crime in Canada.
I don't believe so.
Okay, so what you're saying is someone who's a convicted criminal, they can be convicted of crime anywhere here in Canada, and you still open your doors for them.
Yes.
So to finish off, so this federal Liberal government, has lost control of our immigration system. We've seen the pattern of this on this committee, but local Peel residents are paying the price locally through crowded shelters, hotel costs, and pressure on frontline services. Is that a fair characterization?
It's added to the complexity of the services we provide, yes.
And it's putting a strain on the services for local Peel residents.
Yes.
Do you think the Liberal government, this federal government, has mismanaged the immigration system at all? In any way?
I'm not qualified to respond whether they mismanaged it. They've stepped up when we've identified issues and cost issues, and they're not doing solutions through funding.
They're not doing enough to help the local municipality. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Ho. Thank you, Mr. Jacques. Next, we have 5 minutes for Mr. Zuberi.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and to all the witnesses for being here today. I'd like to continue with Mr. Jacques and give you a moment to just, if you have any further comments about people settling in Canada and also using the housing issue with respect to with hotels and how that factors in for asylum seekers, for families and individuals as they use hotels. If you want to elaborate further on that point.
Thank you. And through the chair, yes. So what we did in the region of Peel was we needed to separate out the two populations, domestic homelessness and the asylum claimants. And we did that. We converted a commercial building to create 592 spaces for individuals in a congregate care setting. And for families, because it's not a compatible use to put families in with single individuals, we have hotels. We are in the process of creating a family shelter for asylum claimants. in the region of Peel. So in those instances, we have dedicated spots for asylum claimants. So they are not taking spaces away from the homeless Indigenous population in Peel. So it really helps us focus our resources, because the needs of the individuals coming in, as Mr. Linga has indicated, those are very specific, and we can focus in on those, and we can focus in the resources that we have to deal with our domestic homeless.
Okay. And I'd like to ask Ms. Stilinga about relocating asylum claimants and the significant consequences on those asylum claimants. For example, if they're away from their cultural communities or linguistic networks, potential social family ties. How does that impact them if they aren't close to those support networks, their integration, their ability to contribute to Canadian society into the future? If you want to comment a bit about that.
Yes, thank you. It makes a huge difference, because people are drawn to people, their networks, where they can feel like they connect, they belong, there's integration, there are community supports. And we know firsthand that those experiences and those opportunities make a huge, vast difference. We know that when people are in places where there aren't networks or there aren't supports, they're not going to be successful. And they will return back to other communities where they may find larger networks or the perception of larger networks or access to jobs. So that is critical. It's essential to have those community supports. And that was my point earlier, that when we are looking at people across Canada, that those communities, those regions need to be set up in ways that provide those supports that are critical for successful integration.
Certainly. And so the settlement services that we've been discussing so far, they play a critical role in, to what extent do they play an important role or a role in an asylum seeker choosing to settle in one region or another, the existence of these settlement services, such as what we have heard about being provided? To what extent do they factor in to that decision making?
Well, they do, because the assumption on their part also is that because those services are there, that they will be successful. They will have a better chance of finding housing, a better chance of finding language supports, a better chance of getting employment. And so that's the draw for them. There are also probably community networks for them in terms of their own cultural communities and backgrounds, shops and businesses and networks that exist that help them. So, and we know through the settlement support that the outcomes are far more positive. So that does exist. And that is a draw. That's an important part of how people feel like they can connect and be successful in their communities where they live.
I'd like to just ask, with respect to you testified earlier that large centers like Toronto and Montreal tend to attract asylum seekers. Are you seeing any trends where asylum seekers are moving outside of the metropolitan centers to, more suburban, rural areas? If you want to comment a bit about that.
They are, and we know that there are communities in Kitchener and London, in York region, and other parts of Ontario and across Canada where people are looking to settle. And I think the point is that if we can provide them with information about what exists and what their opportunities for success are, if we can provide that access, they will be more successful and they will be more willing to go. What happens is if they don't have that information, or they have misleading information or perceptions about certain communities, and if that's not clearly visible to them or understood, there's a greater chance of failure in terms of settlement.
Thank you, Ms. Stilinga. Thank you, Mr. Zuberi. Monsieur Deschênes, c'est à vous 2 minutes et demie.
Mr. Deschênes, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Baruchiski, let's continue talking about what Germany has done, because there's a suggestion that this could inform what we do in Canada. So in terms of the distribution, can you explain the process? So in Germany, there are these states called the Länder, and they created a formula so that each Länder can welcome a part of the asylum seekers that they can handle. So I've understood that the 2/3 is based on the taxation base, and the other third by the demographic data. So they define a capacity for welcome from these two. Yes. And when the asylum seeker arrives, what happens? What I understand is that they're oriented to one of these Länder, and they have the obligation to stay there for 3 years. The services will be offered in that land, one of the Länder, and the person will be encouraged to stay there. And the idea is to have a distribution throughout the German Federation in a fair way. So is it an obligation where the asylum, or can the asylum seeker decide that he will or she will stay in Berlin? My impression is that the German authorities speak in a much more subtle way. It's not that they insist. They're just strongly encouraging those people. And it's not the only European government that's doing that. So the services are offered in that land, and if the person doesn't want to go there, there will be all sorts of administrative problems facing them. So it's a kind of a administrative measure that is coercive. And does it work that way? For the distribution, I have the impression that it's working quite well. So there is a true distribution there. And I've been to Berlin and other places, and we can see centers that have been created providing services, and that encourages the populations outside of the larger centers to take into account forced immigration. So it functions to the extent that the central administration in Berlin provides resources to the various Länder so that they can host and welcome these people properly. Thank you, Mr. Deschênes, and thank you, Professor Baruczycki.
2 minutes to Mr. Redekop and 2 minutes to Mr. Fragiscatos. Mr. Redekop.
Thank you. The minister expects about 2 million temporary residents to leave Canada this year. That's about 160,000 per month, which in the area of Peel is probably tens of thousands per month. So, Mr. Jakes, are you seeing that on the ground? Are you seeing tens of thousands of people leave the country once their permits expire?
We wouldn't have evidence of that, so we don't track whether they leave the country or not. So once they qualify and they've registered, that's up for IRCC to track their movement within.
Ms. Stilling, have you seen even anecdotal evidence of people leaving in the thousands and tens of thousands to achieve the number the minister is expecting?
We've certainly heard from individuals and families that they are considering going back home or to other places because they've not been successful here. They've not found the opportunities that they thought that they might find.
Are you seeing thousands and thousands of people leaving every month?
No, I don't have.
Mr. Baruczycki, there's kind of an assumption, I think, here that we have all of these people coming into our country and we need to find solutions for them. But I think we also need to back up and say, are there some things that we're doing to attract people here that maybe we should be doing differently? Like we talked about not allowing claims from people transiting safe countries, people abandoning claims when they've returned home, for example. Do you think we need to be working at that end of it too, to actually curb the number of people that are coming to our country?
If we're concerned about the number of asylum seekers, and I think we should be, I think the inadmissibility provision in Section 101 of the Immigration Act should be reconsidered and maybe enlarged. So along the lines of what you suggest, there's certain kinds of claims, certain kinds of people that are claiming able to claim asylum in Canada, which they could not do in Europe, for example, at the moment. You can't just travel around a whole bunch of safe countries and then claim asylum in the last country that you transited.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Mr. Redekop. 2 minutes for you, Mr. Fragiscatos. Begins now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. In fact, I think that while on the face of it there could be a gap between what Ms. Stillenga has offered the committee and what you have offered Mr. Baruczycki, I think there is some overlap. For example, Ms. Stillenga, you're talking about ultimately ensuring that we have a sustainable system, that those who are in the process of claiming asylum go to communities that can accommodate them, that where they can find the chance for integration, where services won't be overwhelmed. And Mr. Baraczewski, I see you nodding. You do agree with that principle. I want to learn more about the German model, because all of that seems to be predicated on buy-in, not just from the federal side in Germany, but from the local governments or the regional governments, the Länder governments that you're referring to. The same would have to come into being here in this country if ultimately we were to see a move towards what both of you are suggesting in terms of the ability of communities to integrate, to accommodate, and to ensure that services are not overwhelmed. Would you say that's a fair characterization, Mr. Baraczewski?
Yes, I'd say the various lenders do actually try to negotiate to get the help from Berlin.
Okay. And I'll, with 30 seconds left, what is your key recommendation to this committee in a sentence or two, Mr. Baraczewski and Ms. Stilinga?
So as I think I was suggesting in my opening statement, I think we have to get the basic principles straight. So we have to think hard about what are we trying to do. I would add that we want to distinguish asylum seekers from all the other immigrants. They're not the same kind of category, because we want to make sure there aren't future problems. And I think that if we want a more equitable federation, where we're addressing a lot of the concerns raised by my colleague here, I think it is a smart idea.
Ms. Stilinga, 15 seconds, sorry, and then we have to wrap up. Ms. Stilinga.
We are recommending a multi-year intergovernmental national asylum and housing strategy that is coordinated, that links reception, shelter capacity, and pathways to success for positive outcomes. Coordinated supports reduce duplication, shorten time and temporary accommodation, and help people move toward work and independence sooner.
Thank you, Ms. Stilinga. Thank you, Mr. Fragiscatos. I want to thank all the witnesses today. That was excellent testimony and an excellent conversation. Thanks to all my colleagues for the great questions. And I want to thank everyone for their time today. We're going to suspend for about 5 minutes so the witnesses, the current group of witnesses, can leave, and we'll get back with the second panel. We are now going to begin for our second panel. And I'm going to make a few comments for the benefit of our new witnesses. All of you are joining us hybrid. So you will notice at the bottom of your screen, you could select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either English or French. I will let you know, you will each be given 5 minutes for opening remarks. I will let you know when you have 1 minute left. Kindly wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And a reminder that all comments need to be made through the chair. And now I'd like to warmly welcome all of our witnesses for the second panel. Avec nous, on a Pierre Fortin, professeur
We have
département
with us Pierre Fortin, Professor, Department of Economics, Université du Québec à Montréal. And we also have Elena Roulet, Director General for the Carrefour Le Moutier, and Olive Mukamana, who is Coordinator of Services for Newcomers. And we also have
the editor for the audit.ca. So again, up to 5 minutes will be given to each one of you for opening remarks, and then we will proceed with rounds of questions. Je commence avec Professeur Fortin.
I will start with Professor Fortin for 5 minutes, which are starting now. Mr. Fortin. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to all members of the committee. I am deeply honored by your kind invitation to give evidence.
French and end in English. Okay, je me sens confortable.
I feel very much at ease in front of your committee for 2 reasons. First of all, my own family is almost entirely made up of immigrants. All but one of my 15 children, stepchildren, and grandchildren are first or second generation immigrants. Secondly, at the invitation of the Quebec Ministry of Immigration, since 2022, I've prepared 2 research papers on immigration policy. I'm also a member of the Advisory Committee on Immigration at the C.D. Howe Institute in Toronto. From 2016 to 2024, the annual immigration rate quadrupled in Canada. In 2024, Prime Minister Trudeau decided to slow the pace in light of what he described as an unsustainable pressure on housing and public services. This shift in Canada's immigration policy, which is now underway, is fully consistent with the research published on the economic effects of the experience of the period from 2016 to 2024. There's no doubt that this is a step in the right direction.
Statistics Canada has estimated that in January of this year, there were over 500,000 asylum seekers residing in Canada, and some 85% of them in Ontario and Quebec. These 2 provinces must therefore carry a disproportionate load of the provincial public services offered to the seekers, much of it due to social assistance expenditures. I'm not at all an expert on asylum demands, but one does not need a PhD in management to understand that a sensible approach to this problem should include the following. A sensible, I mean, rigorous and humane, an equilibrium. One immediately rejects claims that are obviously undeserving at the time they show up at the gate. 2, minimize all kinds of internal administrative delays in the department. 3, simplify and accelerate the currently cumbersome and lengthy hearing process. 4, make sure that rejected candidates leave Canada without delay. 5, explore means of making provinces other than Ontario and Quebec more attractive to asylum seekers. 6, reach a reasonable agreement with receiving provinces for quick reimbursements of allowable expense. For foreign inspiration, I would urge you to look carefully at the phases of the asylum procedure that Denmark's or Germany's social democratic governments currently apply. Beyond the matter of asylum demands, I would make the following additional suggestions. One, align immigration policy along lines the Canadian population wants, and do not be misled by the errors of business lobbies who reject any moderation of immigration. Two, as recommended by our City Hall Committee, let immigration be guided by the rigorous building of the long-term human capital base of the economy and not by short-term fixes that prioritize lower-skilled workers or by non-economic objectives, such as increasing Francophone immigration outside Quebec. Avoid denying that the use of French is declining in Quebec and claiming that the English minority is under threat in the province. And lastly, give Quebec full control over management of the international mobility program in the province. Thank you very much.
Mr. Fortin. Next, on a Madame Roulet.
And now we have Ms. Roulet from the Carrefour Le Métier. You have 5 minutes. Perfect. Thank you. I will be sharing the microphone with my colleague Olive Mukamana if she is also allowed to speak. So, hello, on behalf of the Carrefour Le Métier, its team, and the people we support on a daily basis. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak today about the experience of asylum seekers, particularly in our case within the Longueuil metropolitan area on the south shore of Montreal. Who we are. Carrefour Le Métier is a frontline organization whose mission is to welcome, to listen to, and to empower anyone going through a difficult time or a period of transition so that they can regain their strength and the ability to act for themselves and their community. We're an organization mandated by the Quebec Ministry of Immigration, Francisation, and Integration to support asylum seekers in their settlement process and their search for housing. Over the past year, throughout all our initiatives, we have supported more than 1,105 asylum seekers in their settlement processes, their access to their rights, their administrative procedures, and also to meet their basic needs. Over the last 3 years, we have seen an average increase of 20% in the number of people we support as asylum seekers. I will ask my colleague Olive to talk about the issues. Thank you, Elena. Today, we're talking about what we see regularly in the activities we carry out with asylum seekers. So the main challenges we want to mention are access to housing, given there's a lot of pressure on the rental market and on affordable housing. Also, there are obstacles such as discrimination, misunderstanding of their status. So they have things like a lack of credit history, they can't have it, and that limits even more their access to housing. And there's also access to services, including legal services that are difficult for them to access, and it can delay essential steps in their journey in terms of legal support. They're more vulnerable. There's also a problem in terms of access to health and social services. As for all vulnerable people who have a complex journey, they arrive with significant needs, both physical and psychological, but they must navigate a health and social services system with which they're unfamiliar in the context of this vulnerability. We support people facing difficulties of this nature, particularly when the interim federal health program is not recognized or misunderstood by certain service providers. So they can get more information so they can better understand what the medical coverage exists. But there are problems of access because they don't understand the procedures. There's also a context of ongoing adaptation. So supporting asylum seekers involves far more than just organizations specialized in immigration and calls. We have to adapt to these vulnerable people, which does not exclude asylum seekers. But in this situation, the community resources have to do a lot with very little. So we need to have better access to stable funding. So, Hélène, I'll pass you the mic. So, drawing on our experiences in the field, we support the position of the coalition, the Table de concertation des organismes au service des personnes réfugiées et immigrantes, the working group for organizations serving refugees and immigrants, which states that any distribution of asylum seekers among the provinces must be carried out with a view to respect the fundamental rights of asylum seekers, to provide access to adequate legal services, to have the involvement of the community organization in distribution strategies, also the removal of barriers to integration and inclusion, particularly in terms of French language acquisition, employability, and access to social support systems, and finally, funding adapted to the realities and needs of the organizations in the field. So we're really recommending an approach based on prevention, coordination, and collaboration between the various actors and stakeholders, which would facilitate a smoother settlement for asylum seekers, but recognize the social, economic, cultural, and human contribution they make to the communities that welcome them. Thank you.
Audit.ca. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate today. To make myself maybe useful, I'll try to maybe bring some data to provide a little bit of background and context that speaks to what's happening and where we might want to move going forward. In a way, reallocation actually is already happening. According to Statistics Canada, the proportion of asylum seekers has been growing a lot faster in New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Now, it's growing everywhere. In Ontario, the growth since the third quarter of 2023 to the first quarter of 2026 was 179% or something like that. It's significant growth in the refugee population. But in those provinces, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, the growth has been much faster. Those are small numbers when you look at it as raw numbers, but it's a trend that is steady and persistent. And perhaps it's worth trying to understand why that's happening and maybe to see if we can encourage it and make it grow. We also have data tracking tax filers from their post-admission year, that is the 5 or 6 years after they're admitted as permanent residents, in which province they file their taxes. I don't know, how much they file, how much income they report. That I wouldn't have access to, obviously, but which province they're filing their taxes. And we see that there is, by and large, stability. That is, as a predictor of how refugee and then permanent resident populations will move, 80% or so for most provinces will stay in the province of admission. So there isn't a lot of mobility. There are exceptions, and when there are exceptions, they tend to move to Alberta and Ontario and British Columbia. But that's really echoes how interprovincial migration happens in the population in general, and they tend to move away from Quebec. If there's any large movement away from a province, that would be from Quebec. Again, those aren't directly relevant to what we're talking about here today, but perhaps that behavior is a predictor of how populations move in the country. Mr. Jacques reported before that in Peel, there were a few years ago, at least, the extent of the refugee population within homeless shelters. I have data, the most recently available data from the City of Toronto from the first quarter of 2026, that in Toronto, where they apparently have not separated the two populations out, the municipal shelters, actually their refugee population makes up 39% of the beds in Toronto shelters, and that is unsustainable. Aside from the cost, it is clearly pushing local homeless people out of shelters. So that's there. There is obviously federal money coming into the system to support to some degree, but I don't know if money is the solution there. There's just there is a drain on the system. In general, I think we could all agree, I think it's obvious, that the underlying base problem that's driving these stresses is the backload in IRB decisions. There are 500,000 people waiting in the system for the resolution to their applications, and there's no mathematical way that the IRB members could ever process that in a meaningful space of time. For context, in 2025, there were 395 active IRB members, and by active, the reporting I saw said that anybody who's delivered 20 or more. Thank you. Anybody who's delivered 20 or more decisions in the past year is considered active. So only 395 active members it's not possible for them to process. So of course you want to triage. Just quickly, two triage approaches we might use. One, to speed up credential recognition. That all the provinces in the federal government have stood behind the idea of allowing foreign professionals in high need areas to get in quickly. Well, this is a great way to do that. And two, to integrate AI models so that with human review, so that you can quickly flag obvious decisions that this applicant will definitely come in, or this applicant will definitely be rejected, but flag it for human review. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clinton. And that completes all our opening witness statements. So we are going to begin with rounds of questions. We begin with 6-minute rounds. Mr. Ho, you begin with 6 minutes. It starts now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are for Mr. Clinton at the audit.ca. So, Mr. Clinton, you have suggested or talked about previously that immigration levels may be shaped by political incentives and stakeholder pressure. Could you elaborate a little bit more about this point?
Well, it's obvious that all governments react to the loudest, the squeakiest wheel, and I guess when there are people who are motivated to squeak louder and to provide political pressure, then they're always going to get an audience, I suppose. That's fair, and that's part of the system. I can't think offhand of any concrete examples of specific mechanisms by which these voices might have maybe skewed the system. The system certainly seemed to have been skewed, though.
So in your assessment, are the current immigration levels, and we've seen the influx of over 1 million temporary residents coming in some years, over the recent years that the Liberal government has led in. Do you think that's based more on ideology, or is that based more on evidence?
I haven't seen much evidence of evidence. I haven't seen beyond the obvious and universally agreed principle that we do want to help people around the world who need us. I think everybody agrees with that. But I haven't seen evidence that more strategic thinking is being applied.
And we've seen, of course, immigration policy should serve the national interest, serve the interests of Canadians, and we've seen the immigration officials and the Liberal immigration minister testify that there were no caps on temporary residents. So, in an article, you said that in the refugee law data apparently found a strong correlation between low recognition rates and briefer employment at the IRB. In other words, members who say yes and approve more applications more often last longer in their jobs. Do you believe the IRB officials are letting asylum claimants stay due to fear of repercussions surrounding their job?
Okay, so that's an important point. I should say that I read that report and I can't independently confirm it, but it seems to make sense that there are obviously incentives inside IRB to move things quickly. We're the ones putting pressure. The country and the government are putting pressure on the IRB to move quickly. So it makes sense that that individual members of the IRB would feel pressure to expedite the process. The risk, of course, is that there won't be due process and that the people who should be caught before being approved won't be caught. So I would be surprised if there weren't such pressures. Is that correlation between tenure and the number of recognitions you provide, is that real? I can't say for sure it is real, but it's possible.
It's possible that that asylum claimants who would not otherwise be approved are slipping in because of these pressures. That
I would be surprised if they weren't. Right. I mean, there's no way any government or any organization could handle 500,000 human beings in a real world situation.
Right. So, do you think there's a real risk that perhaps we're admitting criminals into the country because of this pressure?
I'd say it's obvious that we already have and continue to.
So,
whether that's an acceptable level of risk, I don't know. I mean, it could be that's an acceptable risk. No system is perfect, but it certainly happens.
So I'll turn the page a little bit, Mr. Clinton. So you've written about the temporary foreign worker program, and you've sort of questioned whether it's still being used to address genuine labor shortages. So in your view, has the Liberal government allowed the program to drift from filling genuine shortages into supplying low-cost labor and thus suppressing wages for Canadian workers?
I actually have two minds on that. On the one hand, looking at the regular reports that various government agencies are releasing, it seems that they are still trying to monitor the actual employment, the labor situation, and trying to be responsive to it in their policy. It does seem that is still, it's being applied and hopefully it's working. I don't know. Is it really in sync with the real situation on the ground? I don't know. I don't have enough. I don't have enough insights or data to know that. I know that one of my sons keeps complaining about the labor.
30 seconds.
We see unemployment at almost 15%. These are recessionary levels, and in urban centers, it's much higher. So, but do you think the Liberal government has mismanaged this program?
It's possible, or it may not even be at the government level, maybe at a ministry level or an agency level. I'm not sure, but it's there are pressures, and it's very likely that the TFB is contributing to those pressures.
Thank you, Mr. Clinton. Thank you, Mr. Ho. Next, we have 6 minutes for Mr. Cheng. Mr. Cheng, 6 minutes begins now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first set of questions will goes to Ms. Hulate. Thank you for being with here today. Your organization works directly with asylum seekers and newcomers on the ground every day. Could you share how rapid increases in asylum claims in recent years affected your organization's capacity, staffing, housing support, and ability to provide quality settlement services? Ms. Hulate?
Oui, merci. Je laisserai aussi
Thank you. And I will also ask my colleague to complete this. We do observe that there's already current pressure on housing for the entire population, so that will always be a challenge, as we were saying at the beginning. Where we observe even greater challenges is the accessibility and the understanding of the regulations that are applicable. So asylum seekers and face owners who might have, or landlords that have difficulty understanding their situation. So there are obstacles to have access. And as we said earlier, in terms of the credit lines, there's no credit history, and that leads to difficulties. And then in terms of the realities in the field. Depending on the number of people arriving to the Carrefour Le Moutier, we have this concern to be able to respond to their needs. So we work together with other organizations to respond to their various needs, be they needs related to basic needs. So once they have finally found housing, there's finding furniture. That's something we do in relationship with other organizations. So what we've done over the past 2 years, where we've had more arrivals, we had supplementary support from various departments. That was helpful, and that's how we were able to respond to issues. We created a new positions with that funding, which is to support all people, to have a global approach to support for anyone who comes to our organizations, to be able to offer a safety net to those people. If my colleague Olive wanted to add something about this, what we also observed was there was a request for information and for training from our partners in the field who wanted to better understand what is the status of an asylum seekers, what services do they have access to. So we saw increased requests for information from community organizations and others, but also something that we really appreciated, where we looked at various organizations that were trying to find out how to respond to the needs. That's when many people arrived to our area, which created some groups for emergency help and the capacity of having shared responsibility for particular issues. And we saw an increase of stories that talk about all kinds of needs that are more specific to asylum seekers. And so we think that there are social and structural problems such as access to health, access to education, access to housing are problems that already exist in our society. And then when new people arrive, then it's more obvious, more noticeable. But it's not that the asylum seekers are the cause of those problems. So we saw some narratives in various milieux, and we were able to diminish that, because that's something that increases the stigmatization of these people who are mostly in situations of vulnerability.
I'm just noticing that the bells seems to have gone. I will need unanimous consent to continue. Should we just complete this round of questions, the first round, or that would take us to maybe around 12:45? Actually, a little bit
Madame la
beforehand.
Présidente.
Do you want to do another second round? Okay, so 10 more minutes. That would take us to, 10 minutes to 1 then. So we'll go until 1:50 p.m., if that's okay? 1:50 p.m.? Monsieur Deschênes, ça va?
Mr. Deschênes, are you okay? Yes, I would even suggest we go till 1 p.m. because from what I've understood, the vote is at 1:08, so we can benefit from what we learned from all these witnesses.
Information. I thought it was 1 o'clock. Monsieur Joseph.
Madame la Présidente, je pense pas que c'est une bonne
Madam
idée.
Chair, I don't think it's a good idea to go to 1. Maybe my colleague will be voting with his phone, but it's maybe not the case for all the members here.
It just started, so it's certainly 30 minutes bells.
Oh, 30 minutes. Okay, so if it's okay with everyone, we'll go to 1 o'clock. Okay, we'll go to Mr. Fredescaros. Sure. Okay, Monsieur Deschênes, jusqu'à 1 heure. Okay.
Mr. Deschênes, till when?
Half an hour. It is 10 minutes. It just started. Oh, okay. We will finish at 12:58, so that'll give us, if that's okay, 10 minutes. Agreed. Oh, okay, Monsieur Deschênes, I hope that's okay. Okay, merci. We will continue. You have 55 seconds, Mr. Chang, to finish up.
Okay, so the federal government, Ms. Hullet, the federal government has emphasized restoring balance and sustainability to the immigration system, and Quebec has recently seen a significant decline in asylum claims. From the perspective of a service provider, how important are predictable and manageable intake levels in helping newcomers receive the support they need to settle successfully?
Oui, c'est une bonne question.
Yes, that's a good question. In terms of a global vision, other organizations such as TCRI might be able to give you more information about that. But what we've observed, we have seen that we have more emergency housing centers in our area over the past few months. That's happened, so we can we're better equipped, and the needs are more and more complex. So that adds to the complications in the equation. Yes, there's the issue of housing, and that's a basic need, and we really try to help the person in a holistic way, and that's where we have to invest more. Thank you, Ms. Roulet.
Next, we have 6 minutes for Monsieur Deschênes. C'est à vous, Monsieur Deschênes, 6 minutes.
You have the floor for 6 minutes, Mr. Deschênes. Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are for Mr. Fortin. I'm very happy that you accepted to come to our important study on a fair distribution of asylum seekers, and that you can give us your expertise. You submitted a brief to the Government of Quebec in 2025 where you proposed reducing the number of asylum seekers in Quebec. Currently, it seems that we're 22% of the population of Canada, and we accept 37% of asylum seekers. So you wanted us to maybe reduce the asylum seekers by a half. Why did you propose this? Well, this is in the general context where the government policies in Ottawa and in Quebec is to slow down the rate of immigration. So if we compare the situation in countries mentioned by Mr. Baruczyski alluded to, Germany and Denmark, the proportion of people who are arriving in Canada as asylum seekers with the coming as asylum seekers is larger than they have in those countries. But and also over a year and a half, there's been an increase of over 500,000 of the number of people coming. So we have to slow things down, not only in Quebec. I know that you're particularly concerned by the situation in Quebec, but also in Ontario. Quebec and Ontario receive 85% of all asylum seekers in Canada. And so the two things that I proposed to the Quebec government were, on the one hand, that the asylum claims have to be reduced in the same proportion as the other sources of temporary immigration, on the one hand, and on the other hand, that distribution according to what is possible, that there's a better distribution provincially. Yes, I understand. You're an economist on the effects for Quebec of receiving a large number of asylum seekers, disproportionate. What are the effects that that has on the economy, on the public finance of Quebec, on integration, and on the French language? First of all, it's very important to understand that the problem of the housing shortage, of housing affordability, is more serious because of the number of the high number of asylum seekers in relation to other forms of temporary immigration. If you're a landlord and you see, oh, here's an asylum seeker who wants a housing unit, and the landlord is asking himself, how long will it last? What's the risk? Is it 6 months, 1 year, or a year and a half? That tenant will leave. So there's a natural reticence, and it's greater on the part of landlords to accept asylum seekers in relation to other immigrants. And what is the impact on Quebec financiers? Because there's a disproportionate number of asylum seekers that come to Quebec. The greatest part of public services offered by a government like Quebec, and also I think it's true for Ontario, are social services, the aid of help of last resort. So the most recent request of the Quebec government to the IRB was they asked for $650 million in reimbursement for the cost of social support. So to give you an idea, in Greater Montreal, we consider 55% of people on social assistance are of immigrant origin. So the request for Madam Chair, the camera is not following the debate.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
La caméra ne suit pas les débats. Alors, présentement, la caméra est sur vous et je m'adresse à M. Fortin.
That the camera is on you, and I'm speaking to Mr. Fortin. Could we ask the people who are manning the cameras to follow the debate?
This matter, those who are supposed to be rectifying this matter, I'm looking at them. It's just, we don't have a lot of time, Monsieur Fortin. I mean, sorry, Monsieur Deschênes. So I would suggest, can we try it again?
On peut essayer, absolument.
Yes, we can try. So, Mr. Fortin, you were saying that Quebec is claiming about $700 million from the federal government for reimbursing public services costs that are given to asylum claimants. So really the camera operator can't follow. I'm ready to collaborate, but it's a little disconcerting.
Do that screen where you see everyone as opposed to just the main person. Unfortunately, just because we don't have a lot of time, Monsieur Deschênes, and so I think I just want to proceed with the questions.
D'accord, je relance ma question. Monsieur Fortin.
Okay, so Mr. Fortin, so this request by the Quebec government for more than $700 million, is that a request that's justified according to you as an economist? Yes, the responsibility for asylum seekers is federal and not provincial, first of all. And so if there are provincial public services offered, be it in Saskatchewan, in Ontario, or in Quebec, offered by the province, it's natural to expect that the federal government would reimbursing the amount spent by the provinces as quickly as possible because of this. It's not a question of logic. It's a constitutional issue. Thank you, Professor Fortin. Thank you, Mr. Deschênes.
3 minutes for Mr. Menegakis, and we have 3 minutes for Monsieur Joseph, and 1 minute for you to finish up, Monsieur Deschênes. Okay, Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Clinton, we saw an increase in Q4 of 2025 of asylum claim backlogs. Why do you believe that's happening?
Well, the first reason is the IRB simply can't handle the flow. The second reason, obviously, is that whatever it is, whatever controls there could be on who gets to claim and the circumstances that they're getting to claim are too loose. Now, how easy it is to fix all those, I don't know.
Agree that the long processing times are probably costing taxpayers more, given the extra benefits that the asylum claimants get, like accommodations and better health benefits than Canadians get?
I'm sure that's driving costs up, certainly.
You wrote, sir, that some officials are better at resisting the pressure than others, IRB officials. Can you please expand on where that pressure may be coming from?
I think it's two directions, below and above. Below, in other words, the pressures that are being faced by municipalities and by all Canadians and neighborhoods are well known, I'm sure, to the people in the IRB. So they probably, I'm not a mind reader, but I would expect they're sensitive to those pressures and they're trying to speed up. And from above, no doubt, there's political pressure to make the system work better. I can't blame anybody for wanting such an outcome. So it's natural that the IRB members will feel they have to push harder. And it's an easy to predict risk that they'll push too much harder.
Well, you mentioned the backlog of 500,000 people, and you also said, sir, in your testimony, that people that should be caught won't necessarily be caught. It's obvious that we're accepting some people in the country that are criminals. Do you not see the danger in that?
Yeah, there's obviously danger. The question is, I suppose, how do you assess the risk level that's acceptable? Obviously, any large system is going to have holes, and some people are going to get through the holes. We have prisons for a reason. The question that only, I guess, a government can answer is how wide can those holes be before the system has to be reconfigured?
Do you agree that Canadians expect the government to have a very robust system in place to ensure that anyone that's accepted in our country is safe to be around our families, our communities, our children, in community centers, around schools, walking the streets, living next door to us?
15 seconds.
We would certainly, as a Canadian, I would certainly appreciate that. I also recognize that perfection is impossible, but I'd like to be closer to perfection if possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Menegakis, and thank you, Mr. Clinton. Maintenant, c'est à vous, Monsieur Joseph.
Mr. Joseph, you have 3 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wanted to congratulate Ms. Rouillet and Ms. Olive to be here with us today. They're in my riding. And so, speaking of asylum claimants, I have a question. So, not too long ago at the committee, a man from the Ile de la Madeleine and Mr. Deschênes, writing said that a company that had to close because of a labor shortage. I have a question for you. Do the asylum seekers have the right to have a work permit? Yes, they are eligible, even as soon as their claim has been sent in. That permit has to be awarded, waiting for the processing of their requests. Do you think it's a good thing that we would send those people? No, I can't say we're sending them, but do you think these asylum seekers who have a work permit in hand can compensate the problems of labor shortage? For example, in this factory, for example, in the Ile de la Madeleine, which will have to close its doors, yes, that we have noticed that the majority of requests for administrative support is for obtaining a work permit, especially renewing the work permit, because while people are waiting for their request to be processed, and all of those people are working or want to work. All asylum seeker has access to an open work permit, and that does not limit access to the labor market. It's more the openness of the employers and also the linguistic barrier because of Francisation in Quebec. It takes time. So you have a minute. But before you talked about amalgamation. Can you say how that can be a problem for the population, these amalgamations? Yes, when we look at all these social problems, access to health, education, and housing, and we attribute that to the increase of asylum seekers in the area, it's a way of combining things that is it creates a lot of problems and prejudice, which it creates more degradation of our social supports network. So we want to work so people be better integrated in housing and in seeking work. Thank you, Mr. Joseph, and thank you, Ms. Mukamanama. We have 1 more minute for Mr. Deschênes. Thank you, Madam Chair. So on this request of the Quebec government to obtain $700 million to compensate for costs related to asylum seekers. Let's go further. Is the fact that Quebec receives a greater proportion of asylum seekers, can that limit their capacity to provide good services for the integration of the asylum seekers that come here? It's clear that more asylum seekers there are, the more services need to be offered, and that's means that because the capacity of those services will seem lesser. But it's important to understand that the efficiency and the speed with which the federal government is able to settle the files, to process the files. So if the waits for that are shorter, the less expensive it will be for the government of Quebec or the government of Ontario. And so there's a responsibility on the federal side to accelerate the process in an efficient way.
Monsieur Deschênes. So
thank you, Mr. Deschênes.
Panel for today. Merci à tous pour les.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you to all of our witnesses today.
Contribution to the study. And our next meeting is this Wednesday, May the 22nd. A notice has been published. And I am now going to adjourn the meeting so that we can go and vote. Thank you.